The study of anatomy and physiology requires first that we take a look at the essential life functions and define the term homeostasis. I have listed for you here several of the essential life functions. Let's briefly go through each one. The first essential life function is organization. The body must maintain proper order. You actually use quite a bit of the energy that you generate from breaking down your food and going through all of your different metabolic pathways to stay organized. One of the things that you should recognize as you learn about all of the different body systems is how amazingly organized each one of those systems must be. The smallest level of organization in the human body are the cells. Humans are composed of very small compartments that make up the smallest living compartment in your body. These are your cells. Within the cell, you learn about different molecules that can work together, make different organelles, and then each organelle has a different function. All of the organelles work together to produce that living cell. The term metabolism is probably a term you've heard many times before. In a true science class, you learn that metabolism is actually the sum or the collection of all of the different chemical reactions that occur in your body. For example, when you eat food, you are eating sugars, fats, proteins, all different sorts of chemicals, different molecules, and you break those down through various chemical reactions, typically with the goal of ultimately producing energy. Energy is actually ATP, adenosine triphosphate. That is very simply a chemical. Next is development. The human body, all the way down to the cellular level, must be able to change either in how it looks or how it acts as you grow and change. So underneath development, you see we have two other terms, differentiation and growth. Growth is considered simply an increase in size. But even when you finish growing in size, the cells and tissues within your body will differentiate. They will still continue to develop and change. Continuing with our essential life functions, cells in your body are excitable. Excitable means that the cells are able to sense a change in the environment and respond to that particular stimulus. This term, homeostasis, is very important, and we're going to spend a good bit of time on the term homeostasis in just a moment. An essential life function of human beings is reproduction, being able to produce a copy of oneself. This is not simply reproduction in the terms of producing offspring, but something like your skin cells must divide and reproduce exact copies of themselves. And then lastly is evolution. The body will continue to change over time. This is something that we see in the population as a whole, and you can't necessarily see one individual cell or human being evolving. But if we study how human beings as a population or species look over time, we can start to see changes that respond to our environments. So now let's look at that very important term, homeostasis, and understand how we maintain homeostasis through different types of feedback loops in our body. Homeostasis is the body's attempt to maintain an internal stability. Homeostasis does not mean that there is not a change. What it means instead is that when there is a slight change that affects the normal, happy way our body wants to be, we have different mechanisms to pull us back into that perfect state that we are supposed to be in. So I really like using the term an internal stability. It's trying to keep things stable. The examples we always use are things like body temperature, blood pressure, body weight, balancing our sodiums, our potassiums, all those different electrolytes in our body, pH balance. Most often, we use the example of body temperature because that's a really easy one for students to understand. When you think about body temperature, let's say you go outside and you get into the bright sunlight. Immediately, your body temperature is going to go up. Well, that body temperature is not supposed to go up too high because too high of a body temperature can begin to damage cells. It could even cause death if the temperature gets too high. So what happens when we go outside and we get really hot? We start to sweat. Sweat is your body's way of getting back to that homeostatic balance. As you sweat, you are putting water on the body. The water will actually begin to cool your outside of your body down, which will then move in and cool the inside of your body down. So you end up with your temperature going back down. So this is a very simple example of how our body can maintain the correct body temperature. Correct body temperature is a homeostasis. Anyone that has ever played a sport can probably tell you, say you are playing softball or football or even just going for a run. As you begin to run, first you feel very hot. And then you say things like, oh, I finally broke a sweat. I feel better. The breaking of that sweat is actually lowering your body temperature. So there are some proper terms we can use as we describe how we maintain homeostasis. And that is looking at feedback loops. There's a negative feedback loop and a positive feedback loop. So negative feedback doesn't mean something negative or bad. Negative means that you're going to see a reversal or a change. So something has happened in the body, we activate a mechanism, and then the negative feedback loop allows us to change or reverse whatever change occurred. That body temperature example I gave you is a negative feedback loop. But let me give you one a little bit more complex so you can see just how the body can do this. Let's look at blood pressure. So let's say we wake up in the morning, shown here in this picture. We wake up and we just jump out of bed really quickly. Some of you may have experienced this before. As you jump out of bed, sometimes you could even feel a little lightheaded if you do this too quickly. Well, what happens when the person stands up is all of the sudden gravity hits at the feet. The body is in an upright position that is different than it's been for many hours. So the blood begins draining from the top of the body. So it's draining from the brain. That's creating a homeostatic imbalance. Immediately, receptors that sense your blood pressure in the top part of your body send a signal to your heart and say, uh-oh, blood pressure is dropping. Then you'll learn this as we go. The brain is always the integration center. The brain says, oh, my heart's telling me that my blood pressure is low. So the heart is going to get a signal from the brain that says, all right, heart, go ahead and beat faster. By beating faster, you're pumping more blood through those blood vessels. The blood pressure is going to go up. So homeostasis is simply restored because different sensors in the body sense that the blood pressure went down, sent the information to the brain figures out what to do, and sends the signal to go ahead and raise the blood pressure. So you see a couple of terms here. You are always going to see receptors when you're talking about feedback loops. The receptor is what's sensing the change. The integration center, the brain, is what's determining what to do about it. And then the effector is the organ that actually makes the change. So in this particular example, the receptors are actually found near the effector. That's not always true. So on this slide, you can see these are definitions of those three important parts of the feedback loop. So first you have the receptor that senses the change. Then you have the integration center that's going to process that information to decide what to do with it. Then you have the effector. The effector is what is actually going to carry out the response and ultimately accomplish the goal, which was to restore homeostasis. So let's end this short video with a discussion of a positive feedback loop. A positive feedback loop is different because we're not going to see a change. Instead, we're going to see an amplification of an effect. And the classic best example to give of a positive feedback loop is childbirth. So as a woman begins to deliver a child, the baby is going to push against certain parts of the female reproductive system, specifically an area known as the cervix. That is going to stimulate nerve endings. Those nerve endings are part of the receptor system. Once the baby starts pushing, those sensors are going to send a signal to release hormones. The hormone oxytocin is then going to make the uterus where the baby is being held begin to contract. The more the baby pushes lower, the more intense the contractions get, because you're continuing to give that signal over and over again. So that's why it's a positive feedback loop. Okay? So as the baby begins to push downward, that signal is going to be felt by receptors, sending signals to the brain. The brain integrates the signal. The brain then sends out for our effector to release the hormone, and then the hormone is going to cause even stronger contractions to increase childbirth. So the goals of this video are for you to identify the essential functions of life, to understand the term homeostasis, to identify the parts of a feedback loop, and differentiate between positive and negative feedback.